In the late 1960s, Los Angeles, a city shimmering on the surface, a mirage of wealth, movie stars, and the intoxicating promise of fame, palm trees swayed beneath a perpetually optimistic sky, red carpets unrolled for the celebrated and the envied, but just blocks away, a stark reality festered, a stretch of forgotten streets, a place known as Skid Row. It was the city's underbelly, a gaping maw that swallowed the broken, the lost, the utterly forgotten. By day, a chaotic symphony of desperation, by night, a silent, chilling dread. And then, the men started dying. They were found in the grimy alleys, slumped in the doorways of abandoned buildings, their throats slashed so deep, so viciously, they were almost severed from their bodies. Their final grotesque positions seemed deliberate, staged. Sometimes, strange symbols were scrawled around them in chalk, or worse, smeared in blood. At first, the city turned a blind eye. These were homeless men, drifters, souls the system hadn't bothered to track, expendable. But as the body count relentlessly rose, a terrifying truth began to emerge. Something monstrous was happening. Someone was hunting them, and his name was Vaughn Greenwood. Vaughn Greenwood was born in 1944, far from the sun-drenched chaos of Los Angeles in the gray industrial sprawl of Pennsylvania. His life, even from its very beginning, seemed pointed down a dark and treacherous path. Abandoned by his parents at an age too young to comprehend such cruelty, he was cast into a relentless series of foster homes. He never lingered, a quiet, withdrawn boy slipping through the cracks of a system that simply didn't know what to do with a child who spoke little, who connected with no one. As a teenager, Greenwood was a magnet for trouble. Truancy, petty theft, violent outbursts. By the time he reached adulthood, he was a phantom, drifting between cities, leaving nothing behind but a growing rap sheet of minor crimes and increasingly disturbing behaviors. He forged no friendships, claimed no family, saw no future. But what no one realized was the terrifying darkness festering within him, a silent cancer of the soul. In the mid-1960s, a chilling incident in Chicago offered a glimpse into the abyss. Greenwood was arrested for a violent assault, the details grim, sickening. He attacked a man with a broken bottle, an act of seemingly unprovoked savagery. Psychiatrists evaluated him, noting clear signs of delusional thinking, a creeping paranoia that clouded his mind. But he wasn't institutionalized. Instead, he served his time, was released, and simply vanished. He reappeared not through official channels, but like a ghost in the machine, in the grimy heart of Los Angeles. He sank straight into the city's underbelly, into Skid Row itself. Here, anonymity was a cloak easily worn, and no one asked questions. It was here, surrounded by the city's poorest, its most vulnerable, its utterly forgotten, that Vaughn Greenwood found precisely what he'd been looking for. A population no one would miss. And that was when the murders began. The first known victim was discovered in 1964, huddled in a filthy alleyway behind a dilapidated liquor store on the very edge of Skid Row. The man was nameless, faceless. He had no identification, no belongings, just a thin, ragged coat clinging to a body worn thin by a life of relentless hardship. His throat was slashed from ear to ear, a deep, clean cut. It spoke of a terrifying level of precision, a chilling expertise. Nearby, a small tin cup lay on the grimy ground, unsettlingly, filled with what appeared to be fresh human blood. No fingerprints could be found, no witnesses dared to come forward, there were no clues at all. The police were baffled, bewildered. They assumed it was merely the act of another transient, or perhaps someone lost to the torment of mental illness. Just another violent death in a city that had already seen too many. The case was quietly marked unsolved, shelved away in dusty files, forgotten by most. But the terror, it had only just begun. Less than a year later, another body was discovered, not far from the first. This victim, too, was a homeless man, his throat cut in the exact same gruesome way. His body, too, had been arranged with an eerie, almost ritualistic care. Nearby, another container filled with blood was found. This time, a small, cracked ceramic cup. The scene was haunting, an echo of the first, a chilling repetition. Yet it offered no clearer insight into the motive, no concrete suspect. Detectives began to whisper amongst themselves. A pattern was emerging, undeniable now. But with no concrete leads, no tangible connections, the theory remained just that, a whisper. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the killing stopped. It was as if the city had briefly caught its breath, a fragile, temporary peace. For nearly a decade, no more bodies matching the terrifying pattern surfaced. The police, perhaps with a sigh of relief, assumed the killer had moved on, been arrested for other crimes, or worse, had met his own end. They had no idea. During those years, Vaughn Greenwood himself had been locked behind bars for burglary. He served almost 9 years in prison, far away from the streets he had once prowled. The city seemed momentarily safe. But that piece, it was a cruel illusion. When Vaughn Greenwood was finally released in the early 1970s, he didn't disappear. He didn't attempt to forge a new life, to start afresh. Instead, he returned immediately to Los Angeles, to Skid Row, the place he knew best, the place where his darkness had first taken hold. What followed was a terrifying resurgence of violence, one that ramped up in both speed and brutality. Between late 1974 and early 1975, bodies began appearing at an alarming, horrific rate. 11 men were found murdered within a few short months, more than all his previous known victims combined. The killings bore the unmistakable hallmarks of the slasher's work, but there was something even more disturbing about this new wave. Each victim's body was posed in grotesque displays of cruelty and precision. One man was found propped against a dumpster, eyes wide open, staring blankly into the indifferent night. His throat had been slashed, yes, but the positioning of his limbs suggested the killer had taken the time, the meticulous time, to arrange him for some dark, unknowable purpose. Another victim was discovered with strange, intricate carvings etched deep into his chest, symbols so bizarre, so alien, that even seasoned detectives struggled to guess at their meaning. Throughout these horrific murders, each victim shared common tragic traits beyond their gruesome fate. They were homeless men, beaten down by life, the elderly, the vulnerable, often physically disabled. People society had long overlooked, cast aside like so much refuse. Greenwood chose them deliberately. They were easy targets, in one sense, but more than that, his twisted mind believed he was purifying the city, eliminating those he deemed unworthy or, in his chilling delusion, infected. His warped sense of justice had transformed murder into a ritual of cleansing, a perverse act of salvation. The scenes of these crimes were horrifyingly meticulous. Some victims had been washed after death, as if to remove impurities before the ritual was complete. Others bore strange marks on their hands or foreheads, symbols drawn in blood or, chillingly, carved into the very skin. Initially, police speculated these macabre signs might be the work of a cult, perhaps a secret society performing sacrifices in the deep shadows of the city. Rumors spread like wildfire, fueled by sensationalist headlines in the local papers. The media, in their hunger for a name, dubbed the unknown killer the Skid Row Slasher, a name that would stick, spreading like a plague through the headlines, seeking fear into the very bones of the homeless community. The atmosphere in Skid Row shifted palpably. Men who once walked alone now huddled together in desperate groups, watching their backs constantly. Paranoia seeped through the community like a slow-acting poison. The killer was no longer just a rumor, a ghost story whispered around dying fires. He was a terrifying, undeniable reality. People whispered about a figure who moved silently in the night, someone who could vanish into the crowd before anyone even noticed he was there. He was described as quiet, calm, almost unnervingly polite before he struck. Some even claimed he offered food or drink, only to lure victims into isolated spots where the nightmare would truly begin. Detectives assigned to the case found themselves trapped in a maddening game of cat and mouse. The slasher left no fingerprints at the crime scenes, no DNA evidence by the standards of the time was recoverable. The murder weapon, that blade of ultimate terror, was never found. No witnesses ever came forward, not truly. No clear forensic clues surfaced. It was as if the killer simply dissolved into thin air after each attack, leaving behind only the gruesome tableau of death and blood. The terror dragged on seemingly without end. Everything changed. The Skid Row Slasher was no longer just a shadowy figure haunting the streets. He was a force the entire city could no longer ignore. A man named William Graham, a transient like so many others, staggered into a clinic near downtown Los Angeles. A deep, jagged wound ripped across his neck. He was barely, miraculously alive. He gasped to the frantic staff that he'd been attacked in the night by a stranger. The man had offered him food, a gesture of deceptive kindness, and then without warning, lunged with a knife. Graham, against all odds, fought back. He kicked the man off him and ran, adrenaline coursing through his veins. The wound, by a terrifying half-inch, had missed his carotid artery. He gave a description of his attacker: tall, gaunt, with hollow, vacant eyes, and then he added the chilling detail. The man kept muttering strange things, phrases like cleanse the body and purify the street. Detectives, their senses now fully alive, immediately scoured the area where the attack happened. And there, amidst the urban detritus, they found something crucial: a letter, dropped during the struggle. It was addressed to someone named Vaughn. The name, Vaughn. It sent a chill, a profound shiver down Detective Mark Reynolds' spine. He had heard it before, more than once. A few surviving witnesses from Skid Row, men who had endured untold horrors, had mentioned a strange man named Vaughn who lingered near shelters but rarely spoke. One man had even claimed Vaughn tried to give him a drink in a rusted tin cup, insisting it would make him clean again. At the time, it had sounded like the incoherent ramblings of a man lost to drug abuse or simply madness. Now it sounded like a crucial clue, one they had tragically missed. Police dug into their records, their hands working quickly, and there it was, Vaughn Greenwood, recently released from prison. A violent past stretching back years, and a paper trail of disturbing mental health issues. In one report, chillingly, Greenwood claimed he was a divine instrument, chosen by a higher power to purify the wicked by separating the flesh from the soul. Another report detailed his chilling obsession with blood, specifically the idea that consuming or collecting it granted spiritual power, a dark, unholy communion. A search was launched, relentless and urgent. Within days, detectives found him. He was holed up in a crumbling, abandoned church on the Forgotten Outfits of Los Angeles, a rotting structure that looked less like a house of God and more like something out of a nightmare. The front doors were chained from the inside, the windows blacked out against the world. They breached the doors, bracing themselves for a violent confrontation. But inside, it was quiet, unnervingly so. Vaughn Greenwood was sitting alone in the main hall. He was surrounded by flickering candles, their faint light casting dancing shadows on the decaying walls. Behind him, a makeshift altar. On it, blood-stained clothing, ritual bowls, burnt papers, and a large, glinting butcher's knife. He didn't resist arrest. He didn't utter a single word. He simply smiled, a calm, knowing smile, as if he had always known this moment was going to happen, as if it were part of a divine, predetermined plan. Inside the church, investigators found evidence directly linking Greenwood to multiple murders, blood samples, personal items belonging to his victims, and handwritten journals filled with grotesque, meticulous detail. In one entry, he described the feeling of slitting a man's throat as releasing the spirit into the hands of the Father. Another claimed that collecting blood in a circle allowed him to trap the demons that lived inside the sinners. He saw himself not as a killer, but as a holy warrior. Every kill wasn't just an act of violence. To him, it was a sacred duty. He genuinely believed the people he killed were marked by sin, and he, Vaughn Greenwood, was delivering them from evil.
The case quickly made headlines across the country. Skid Row slasher caught, one paper screamed, but the details that emerged were so horrific, so profoundly disturbing that even seasoned detectives had trouble processing what they'd uncovered. Vaughn Greenwood was charged with 11 murders, though some investigators, haunted by the sheer scope of his depravity, believed the true number was far higher. At least 2 earlier killings in Chicago shared his chilling signature. Another body, found years before in Bakersfield, matched his methods almost exactly, but Greenwood never confessed to anything beyond the ones they had irrefutable proof for. In court, he remained a spectacle, calm, smiling, occasionally to himself or staring into the distance as if listening to voices only he could hear. When the judge, his voice heavy with the weight of unspeakable evil, asked him if he had anything to say, Greenwood simply replied, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, "They're clean now. I did my job." He was found guilty, sentenced to life in prison. He would never walk free again. Behind bars, Vaughn Greenwood remained an enigma, a silent, terrifying mystery. He rarely spoke to guards, never caused trouble, and he refused all interviews. For years, he simply sat quietly in his cell, writing in notebooks that were never allowed to leave the confines of the prison. Some believe he continued performing his grotesque rituals, mentally replaying the murders in his head, transforming them into holy sacraments in his twisted mind. He died in prison in 2020, alone, forgotten, no visitors, no mourners. After his arrest, the killings on Skid Row stopped, but the fear for those who had lived through those nightmarish years, it didn't. For the men and women who had huddled in doorways, who had slept with one eye open, the memory of the Skid Row slasher never faded. They had lived among death, unaware of how close it had truly come. Some of them had known Vaughn, not by name perhaps, but by face. The man who handed out odd drinks, the one who muttered to himself, the guy who smiled too long. To them, he had seemed like just another lost soul, another broken man. But beneath that shattered exterior was something else entirely. Vaughn Greenwood didn't wear a mask. He didn't hide in the shadows cloaked in black robes. He was quiet. He was patient. And that in itself was what made him truly terrifying. He didn't need to pretend to be a monster. He already was one. And he existed in a place where monsters could go unnoticed for years.
Even now, people wonder what truly drove him to do what he did. Was it pure, unadulterated insanity? Was it a deep, festering hatred? Or was it something far darker, something that twisted his sense of morality until murder felt to him like salvation? No one knows, and maybe that's the scariest part of all, because Vaughn Greenwood proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that true evil doesn't always come with warning signs or grand, dramatic announcements. Sometimes it just walks silently beside you, smiling, waiting for the right moment to strike.